Thank you, everybody, for coming. I know it's early and on the first day of Cyber Week, so I'm happy to see everybody here. Today's theme in general is security operations in the cloud. And I want to say just one thing before we start, because I got this feedback throughout the last weeks as we're planning this. Security operation does not mean SOC. A lot of people, when they hear security operation, they think SOC. And SOC is a big and substantial part of security operations, of course. But security operations is everything we do in terms of day-to-day operations of our security. So it covers things like IR, it covers things like dealing with configuration changes and a lot of other areas. And so today is all about that, and we'll look at different aspects of it, which I think is very interesting, because I think as we transition to the cloud, security operations is becoming very different and very challenging for some organizations, and basically requires, adaptation. And this is our focus today. So our first panel is really on, let's call it core SecOps, right? We're going to talk about SOCs, IR, things like that, but touch other areas. And then later through the day, we'll get into DevOps and SaaS and other things. So I want to introduce our panelists. We have Tehila Shneider from Elastic. Yifat Aharon Bar-Zeev from Next Insurance. And Noam Perel from Laminar. And Tali Shemer from the National Cyber Directorate. And I'm Ofer Maor, and we try to build, like in all our panels, a mix of vendors who look at the technology space and solutions, and customers or end users that look at the problems. And I think we have a really exciting panel ahead of us. So we'll start by a short introduction from each of our panelists about themselves and some of the problems they're seeing or working with. And then we'll dive into the questions, and we leave about 10 minutes at the end for audience questions. If there's anything you're interested about, keep that to the end. So let's start. Tali, I think, as the government representative, you can start with talking a little bit about yourself and about SecOps challenges that we're seeing.
Yeah. Good morning. Pleasure to be here, and thank you, Moshe and Daniel, for inviting me here. So I'm a National Programs Director in INCD, and I lead the cloud program Nimbus for past 3 years. And Nimbus brought the cloud transformation to the government, but also to the whole Israeli cyberspace. The foundation of Israeli region changed the approach that organizations in the Israeli cyberspace approach cloud. They saw the government going to the cloud, so they said, hey, it's good for me as well. And of course, it changed the way that we as an agency approach cybersecurity operations. So I see two things that changed the security operations in the space. The transformation to the public cloud, together with the AI revolution that we all experience nowadays, creates new complexities. The cloud brings a lot of data that we need to process during security operations, and we have huge amount of events, and we do not have equivalent race in the human race. In the other hand, the automation and AI make it much easier and cheaper to execute attacks, and we see attackers using automation of attacks, including AI, and use generative AI tools, and it make it really easy for them to create complex attack with an ease of using a natural language. On the other hand, we have a shortage of professionals that need to deal with all this rising amount of events, and we have also the need to train the teams and educate them, and it's not surprising that in recent security reports we see that misconfigurations is one of the leading reasons for the public cloud incidents. So I'm glad to be here today to discuss both challenges and the approach to deal with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to Yifat. Yifat sits here as a SecOps leader in a very interesting company. So facing the cloud SecOps challenges.
Yeah, the interesting company name is Next Insurance. We provide InsurTech, which means end-to-end solution for insurance. So I'm so excited to be here today that I had to write for myself, who am I, and share it with you. So I'm the GRC manager and the SecOps lead at Next Insurance. And for me, combining these two domains is very natural thing because as I see security, I think everything in security and everyone in security, from the CISO and down to the analysts, should be based on risk approach, and risk approach should actually lead the way towards security posture and towards good security. In my past as Tali, by the way, I'm coming from government organizations, also banking, corporate, and more massive organization, which compliance issues and regulation is very heavily in these industries. And now I'm copy-pasting this on the one hand to insurance, which is also heavily regulated, but a startup in insurance. This combination is very challenging and very fascinating. When everyone here are talking about moving into cloud, we are cloud-based, which means from day one, we are based on cloud, top-notch technologies, engineers working agile, providing everything you can dream of or everything you want in business in seconds. And I'm, as a security person, should run in this race and be able to support this, which means that I'm transforming from being security person to security enabler. That's my strategy, that's my belief, and that's the way I see things. Also, the culture at Next Insurance is a culture that thinks that everyone should know what is the business incentive. You cannot do anything. By the way, I heard my one of my founders yesterday lecturing about the fact that if he's asking a programmer, why are you doing something? And he answers, because the PM asked me, the product manager asked me. That's not a good answer for him. He wants to know what is the business incentive. And that's exactly the way I work in security. I want to know what we want to do, why we want to do it, what is the end goal for us. And by that, I'm providing the security insights, the landscape of security, what I think should be included in SecOps, what should be included in GRC. And I think basically that is it. Thank you for the chance to speak.
Thank you, Yifat. And I think this is really, really good point. I think a lot of us, especially when we started security, we're very focused on security risks, and we see the risk, but we don't always see what is the opposite of that. What is the risk of blocking something and what risk it presents to the business. And I think, for each one of you, your personal growth, your evolution in this space is really getting to understand the business and how each decision we make impacts it, because then we're a partner and we're not somebody who's, disturbing, which is kind of the reputation security people have. Okay, moving on to Tehila.
Hi.
You're good.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Tehila. I'm a director of engineering at Elastic, leading the cloud security solution, and I'm very happy to be here. Some background about myself. So I started my career as a developer in the intelligence unit at the IDF. I have a master's in computer science. Later on, I was the head of engineering of a company called Chorus AI in the sales domain. And recently, I was the VP R&D of a startup called Build Security that got acquired by Elastic about 1.5 years ago. And ever since then, I lead the CNAPP solution in Elastic, CNAPP Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. And Elastic Security is a search-based security platform that unifies SIEM, endpoint security, and cloud security. And when it comes to cloud security, we have three main pillars in our solution. The first pillar is enabling visibility to our users. We believe that you cannot protect what you don't know that exists. And therefore, we make sure our user get the exposure to the existing assets on their cloud environment so they can protect them. The next pillar would be understanding your posture and managing it. And that is done at Elastic by scanning your cloud assets, making sure they're well configured, and surfacing that to the user in case they're not, so they can handle those misconfigurations. Additional layer in posture management is scanning your assets for vulnerabilities and surfacing those vulnerabilities to users so that they can prevent them before they're being exploited. And the last and not least pillar in our cloud security solution is monitoring your workloads at any given time. And that could be either VMs or containers. We use a technology called eBPF to monitor your kernel events at real time and either prevent them or surface them to the user so they can be investigated and then tackled. And yeah, I think that's it. And I'm guessing we'll continue the discussion.
Thank you. We're moving on to Noam. He's going to give us the perspective on data.
Sure. Hey, so thank you for having me. Tali, I think I woke up so excited. Sorry. Yifat, I think I woke up so excited. I woke up with an English accent this morning. So thank you for having me. I am Israel born and raised, actually born on a kibbutz, studied here in Tel Aviv, but I spent some time with my family in the UK, hence the accent. So I joined Laminar around 3 years ago. I started out as a founding engineer. But as we matured, I really like working with customers, seeing and really facing their problems. In Laminar, we deal with customers that are working on the cloud, and we deal with preventing leaks from the cloud. How do we do that? So Yifat, you mentioned risk. So the one thing that we do with risk is minimizing risks to the data by data security posture management. And that is understanding what data you have on the cloud, where it's stored, so on the assets, and who owns it, right? Then you can ask the questions of who can access that data. And you can also ask, where does this data go, right? And when I mean by that, I mean the other piece of it is actually stopping leaks. So that is DDR, and that is data detection and response. So that is what is happening to the data online. Is anyone sharing data now? Is anyone trying to copy data in an abnormal way? So that is now acting on the data itself. Now, Ofer, you mentioned business context and understanding context. What we do when you have the understanding of the data, what we try at Laminar is to help security practitioners enable their teams, right? Because once you have visibility into the data, you can now actually help the data teams, data scientist teams, use that data, utilize it. It's not just acting upon the data that is misplaced to minimize risk. It's also, how can we use that data to actually enable innovation? So that's a bit about me and Laminar, and again, happy to be here.
Thank you. So I think this is a great panel. I'll introduce myself real quick. So as I said, Ofer Maor, I'm the CTO and founder of Mitiga. Mitiga is probably the last line of defense in SecOps. We do incident response in cloud and SaaS, and basically we help our customers prepare in advance for incidents. So when they happen, we're able to respond very, very quickly and efficiently. In a matter of hours. I think the discussion on data is really relevant there. Whenever a customer calls with an incident, the first question is always, which data was compromised, right? Because that's what drives our decisions. Do we call the regulator? Do we call the customers? What's our notification SLA? What do we need to do? How much impact we have? 90% of that question is around data. And so helping figure out what happened to data within the first few hours is super critical. I think one of the very interesting trends that we see, and again, this is, so about my background 1 second, and then I'll go into what I do day to day. So I've been doing cybersecurity for almost 30 years, a big chunk of them in the AppSec space. I was with Imperva in the early days. I founded 2 companies. One was called Hactics, which was acquired by EY, and the second one was called Secret Security. It was an interactive application security testing, which was acquired by Synopsys. And again, like most of us in the room, I spent most of my career in prevention, detection, testing, assurance, the main pillars of security, which are all very important. But I decided to move to incident response because I realized that, as much as we work in this, breaches are going to happen. And there's an opportunity, there's a need and opportunity to change the way customers are preparing themselves and dealing with breaches. But what I really like about being in IR is that I get to see what's currently happening, right? It's not about, oh, this vulnerability may be exploited by hackers, or this is a very big risk. We see what's going on. We see incidents day in, day out. Customers call us. And, we started with this idea that we'll do IR in the cloud. And the question is, what is cloud, right? And I'm spending a lot of my time on this question lately. And I know it's a stupid question because, what's cloud? Everybody knows what's cloud, right? It's AWS and Google and so on. But the reality is that there are 2 main perspectives on what is cloud. One of them is cloud is everything that's not on your prem, right? And the other one is, when I say cloud, I mean the big CSPs, right? AWS, GCP, Azure, maybe Alibaba or IBM Cloud. But the reality is that for many organizations, most of their cloud transition is to SaaS, right? It's to Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace and Salesforce. And again, we have customers with hundreds and thousands of different SaaS providers. And that's where most of the incidents we are seeing now are happening, in the identity provider, in your Okta or Azure, in your Office 365, Salesforce. Really interesting stuff happening in Workday in terms of breaches. And so, when we talk about cloud, I want us to have this, and our next panel, or the one after our next panel, is about that. It's about the new corporate IT, and I recommend everybody to stay. But really figuring out how to do SecOps, how to deal with detection, response in hundreds of different SaaS providers, which we like to think are managed by the SaaS provider, but they really aren't. Their infrastructure is, but what we do with our users, our data inside them, that's managed by us, and that's what we need to deal with. And we'll come back to that through the panel. So, good, let's start. So I think the first question that a lot of people transitioning into the cloud or who've never been in a cloud environment before are asking is, what are the main differences between cloud-secops and what we know as SecOps? And Yifat, I want to start with you because you worked with a lot of on-prem environments and now you're in a pure cloud environment. How is it different? How does it look different?
Yeah, so I think we couldn't do a better preparation in your intro for my answer to this question. Because I'm a great preacher, and I think that the most important part is to understand the shared liability model. And the first thing you should understand when utilizing a cloud infrastructure is what is the shared liability? Where is your responsibility and where is the vendor responsibility? Let's start the opposite way. Where the vendor responsibility ends and where yours starts. And I think once you get this model, the cloud starts to be more on the pros and less on the cons. And utilizing the infrastructure with that set of mind is the right set of mind that you should be in. That's the first thing. By the way, I will provide 3 differences because I think that's leftovers from the army time that I have.
I just want to interrupt for 1 second before you
Okay,
move to the
let's do it.
second. I think the term shared responsibility is a very confusing term because it kind of sets the notion that we're in it together. And the reality, from my perspective, it's split responsibility. You're responsible for some of it, and I'm responsible for some of it. And there's a very clear, AWS has this really great matrix that sees what's on them and what's on you. And it's not shared at all. It's just divided really well.
Share responsibility anyhow.
I like to see my vendors as partners, but it's a matter of approach. But I accept the comment. And second thing I think is something to acknowledge is the lack of tolerance. When you are cloud-based and you are not working according to policy, you have S3 open to the world or something, then the tolerance for you until a damage will actually occur. I heard something about 11 seconds. And let's not set on the number. Maybe the number was something that somebody invented. But I think also 11 minutes is something that we can't bear, and maybe 11 days. And I think that we should be aware that when you are cloud-based, you are lack of tolerance against when you are on-prem. And third thing is you have massive scalability, but then you don't have this massive visibility. And the differences between scalability and visibility is one of the main issues when working on cloud. So I think when understanding those three, obviously there are more, but understanding those three are the fundamentals of being cloud-based.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the tolerance is a really good perspective. I've been in this space for a long time, did a lot of pen testing. Historically, we had this really strong perimeter, right, our firewalls. And we all know that if you open the wrong port on your firewall, there wasn't a lot of tolerance because scanning happened. Like 20 seconds, you're compromised. But as long as you kept this perimeter, then the rest had more tolerance. In the cloud, everything is scanned. We just had an incident last month. A developer with a customer accidentally posted a piece of code to his private repo on GitHub instead of the corporate one. There was a secret in it. Within 20 seconds, that's the actual number, of that secret appear on GitHub, there was already access to their AWS resource that was that secret. So yes, I totally agree with you. Tehila, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I'll add that I think the one significant difference between on-prem and cloud is how fast things change. When security teams had to operate on-prem applications, they had months to prepare for a new service that is being developed, understand how it's built, what are the logs that it provides. Now it can happen in days. Security team can go to sleep and wake up one day when they have completely new application running on their cloud infrastructure, and now they need to make sure that it's secured and it stands through the right benchmark. So I think this is one of the main challenges that we have in this new world.
Yeah, and I want to add on that. I think, and Daniel mentioned how ephemeral the cloud is, right? Things are coming up and down. Configurations are changing daily. If I look at the work of a SecOps specialist from 5 years ago, something happening on-prem. Endpoint is compromised. The server is compromised. It's the same server for the last 5 years, maybe. And you can go and look in it and look at the logs, and they're there forever, and you can get forensics out of it forever. In the cloud, maybe you had a Kubernetes pod up for 30 seconds during which it was compromised, abused, used for something malicious, and it's down and it's gone. And good luck with that, right? So it's a really, really big difference. And maybe diving a little bit into that, how do you see that translating to different areas of SecOps, right? There's the SOC, there's the IR teams, there are the people that deal with all these configuration changes. How do you feel about each of these specific roles?
Yes, so again, I think there are pros and there are cons. So we can talk about SecOps challenges, but I want to start by saying in this challenge, we also have an opportunity. And we need to understand that. So let's take, for example, let's start with a SIM, right? As Tehila mentioned, and I suggested, when working on cloud, you have a dynamic environment which introduce a lot of logs, a lot of event logs, which makes the SIM activity more challenging. Trying to pull out, I'm sorry, let's let people sit. The data processing and the data storing in large volumes can actually make the challenge for security bigger. And when you want to pull out alerts from these logs and you want to start working with these logs and get it into the SOC, etc., it's become more it's more challenging, obviously. Also, there is a thing of a budget. Security are also a group that should be aligned with the budget. Trying to control your budget when you have a budget for SIM and you cannot do it from day one, or the scalability actually challenge you. That's also something that the CISO start looking into cost and being efficient on cloud, etc. And that's a whole new challenge for him when working with a SIM. I also promised props, right? You talked about the IR also?
Yeah, you can
You
talk
asked me
about it. I
also
can talk about it.
I'm telling you, you asked me about the IR also. So the visibility for the IR teams when trying to contain an incident or to investigate an incident, the forensic when having large data, or when sharing liability. I promised that I will be a preacher of shared liability, right? When sharing liability with a cloud provider, that's also a thing, because sometimes I remember days when forensics starts with suitcases, with the team with the suitcases, came to the data center, and now where will you go, right? You won't have a physical access. The forensics is from remote. That's also a pro, right? That you can do forensics from remote, and the scalability is also that goes both ways, right? So the CISO on the one hand is challenged by the cost, but also the scalability is being utilized and used for his tools, for his forensics. So when he works the right way, the visibility can actually be better.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I think I had this discussion with a Gartner analyst last week, and he, I mentioned the problem of visibility, and said the problem is not visibility. There's infinite visibility in the cloud. The problem is we just don't know how to find anything in this data. But yeah, and I think your point on forensics is really good, and it ties to the shared responsibility, because most of the cloud vendors will give us data, forensic type of data, not suitcase forensic type of data, but logs, configuration, things that we can use to do forensic investigation. But again, going back to the responsibility model, they offer it, you need to take it. If you don't take it, and then you need it, 6 months later, it may no longer be available, because cloud providers can't hold everybody's data forever. And so you need to be aware of it.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on the challenges that I see. And you mentioned large volumes of data. And yes, there are a bunch of tools, but what we're lacking is, and you mentioned business context as well, right? So once you don't have understanding of what data you have, of the actual data, what's the business context? So there's an incident. How problematic is that, right? And Tali, you mentioned events. There are infinite number of events, right? How do you prioritize? How do you know where to start? That's the challenge that we see on the cloud. But again, the pros for me, obviously, in starting as an engineer on the cloud, working from the on-prem. I remember I had to set up a new DB. I had to ask for it. In Hebrew, we said pizza plate, right? And then we would have to install it. And now in the cloud, you just 2 clicks of a button and you have a new database, right? So that's the enablement part. So that's obviously the pro. But again, there are many challenges with context and prioritizing.
Yeah, and I think every new technology, every new good technology brings both challenges and opportunities, and we can leverage one for the other. So I want to move on to you, Tehila, because I think for most organizations are not born cloud native. It's not like one day you do what Yifat, you just move from on-prem to cloud. Most organizations go through the very painful process of transitioning to the cloud. And I believe you at the Cyber Directorate probably see a lot of organizations going through that process. So maybe, taking these differences and challenges, how does that translate into the transition process? What are organizations facing when they try to move through that process?
Yeah, so in this process, I think organization address the 3 domains of that we well know of people, process, and the technology. So first of all, you mentioned that Ofer, cloud moves really fast. The vulnerabilities exploitation happens really sometimes in minutes or even seconds. So the defender need to identify the gaps and implement protection measures in place in a very fast manner. In order to do that, you need to have very well-trained personnel. So you need really to address the people dimension, the training, and the familiarity of the team with the new environment. From process perspective, we also discussed it, the problems or challenges part. You have a lot of logs, but how do you know what do you need to collect, and how can you find at the right time whatever you need? How do you gain asset visibility, right? We have elasticity in the cloud environment. So sometimes machine may live just for a few minutes, and then we need to do the IR part, right? How do we know what happened? It changes the way we need to run our process on the cloud. And the last one, the technological side, when we starting the transformation, we use the on-premise technologies to address problems we have in the cloud. And Yifat mentioned here the SIEM, and it doesn't work sometimes because you have huge amount of data that you need to offload on-premise, which is sometimes might be costly. And also the on-prem system sometimes just not able to process such a huge volumes of data. So you need to address the technology dimension and plan forward the new technologies. Less talking about SIEM, but talking about security operations platform that takes all the process and automate it as a whole.
Yeah, I would say you need tech that would support the scale, right? We've heard like scale being mentioned like 3-4 times in this conversation, right? So I very much like the way you said it, and that's tech that can really tackle the scale of the clouds. And moving from the on-prem, usually it just scales differently. So that's how I see it. In terms of people, when I deal with people dealing with data, they understand data very well. They lack the understanding of the infrastructure of the cloud, right? So they don't have the proficiency in all of these new technologies. Specifically now from my take on databases, think how many new database technologies there are out there, right? Any conference you go now, oh, there's new ClickHouse. Cassandra is the cool new thing. It's the hipster DB, right? So how are the people needing to tackle and reduce the risk know that? So that's another thing that I see with people as well.
Yeah, I think we can't stress enough the scale, but also I think the understanding of cloud. I think a lot of the legacy technologies, processes, and people are around the core risks that we see in on-prem, right? So endpoint compromise, Active Directory compromise, lateral movement within those things. You know, what incidents look like 10 years ago. In the cloud, it's just different. And I think, and going on your speed, and we'll touch on the talent gap in a second, but going to speed, I think one of the biggest transformations for SecOps is moving from something that is more manual, even if it has some SOAR automation, but still the main decision making is manual, into something that's automated, because that's the only way to respond in those timelines, right? If it's 10 seconds or 20 seconds or even 5 minutes, if we don't have automation in place, it's difficult. And then we expect our SecOps people, who traditionally didn't know anything about programming, to, at least some of them, have a good understanding of basic scripting, programming, and that leads me to the next discussion, which I think, talent gap. We need people now to understand how to build automation. We need people to understand the cloud. And when I say cloud, I think, just before I move on, I think one of the really interesting bits is, if we look at this cloud security space, it started with workload protection, which is really not cloud, in the sense that it's securing the hosts running on the cloud, right? So hosts in the context of cloud, but now it's moving more to the cloud native. And there's so many things you need to understand in AWS or Office 365 or Okta to be in SecOps today. So how do we deal with the talent gap? And Tehila, again, I think from the governmental perspective, I think you have a very important perspective on that.
Yes, well, I would like to say that we need to build the human capital capacity, but in my opinion, we need to do it, but it will never be enough. So I think to overcome the cloud transformation challenges and the AI revolution that we're having these days, we need to embed automation into our security operations. We have no other way to do it. And Ofer, you mentioned it, that our analysts now need to learn how to write code. But I think the most important one, that we need to implement in place autonomous operation that will let the analysts deal with about 10% of the events that needed to be researched, and this automation will help him, instead of going and researching a lot of places manually, it can bring everything to one place and make the analyst work much more effective and much faster.
This is obviously easier said than done, right? But we need to try and make our security practitioners heroes of the organization. Or heroes, as I said, is a big word, but maybe enablers, right? It's not just, how do you stop? What are you doing here? How do you audit? How can they become enablers of the organization? So maybe they have tools that can help sharing data between organizations, or what applications are running. So sharing activities, that is a main, I think, difference and take that I see in different organizations, if security are not just stoppers of innovation, but also enablers. Obviously, easier said than done.
If you're a superhero of security, is your special power saying yes rather than no?
Ofer, if I might just add one thing, and it continues what you said, Tali. I do believe in automation. Obviously, all of us are here because we have some great security tools that we want you to use and gain value of. But my strong advice is choose those tools wisely. Choose tools that will make the talent gap be a bit smaller, so that your talent, there's real experts, there's real security experts that you have, and we all know we have many little of them, will spend their time on the right things. They will investigate the right incidents that needs to be investigated. And I think that's the big challenge today. Finding a consolidated platform that will allow you to surface these real threats that needs to be tackled.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good point, and especially, again, we're not going to get over the talent gap, and part of it is automation. I think the focus on automation shouldn't be entirely replacing people, because we're not there yet, but really making them, as Tali said, very, very effective. But also think on what are the things that you can outsource, even from a talent perspective, right? There's a huge increase in managed solution, and there's a reason for it. And there are things where managed solutions are not at best, right? They don't know your internal applications. They don't have context always, but they are really great at, seeing what's out there in the world. So leverage these things to support the talent gap, and have, find the right managed solution that knows how to work with your team to augment them as well, so that you can work and, again, make the most out of every single individual you have. So Tehila, I'll go back to you, because I think part of the challenge as we transition, and we talked about it, is the technical barriers, right? The technical gaps. If you have a legacy SIM, and again, not mentioning any vendors, but you try to bring in cloud resources, that could be a challenge, right? So how do you see that with customers you talk with?
Yeah, so I think one of the technical challenges when moving to the cloud is that security teams usually will find themselves in a situation where they have part of the infrastructure that is still on-prem and they still need to maintain and make sure that it's secured, and another new part that is transitioning to the cloud. So again, it goes back to the same thing. Once you have a consolidated platform that can support both, your security team's life will be easier, and eventually your organization's security will be higher. I think that's one main significant challenge that teams have to face. And in addition to that, now they need to bring, we said there's much more data in the cloud, which is correct, but also bringing that data in becomes a technical challenge. How do you know what services exist there and what possibilities of data they provide so that you can insert them, ingest them to your platform, and then get the most out of them in trying to detect the possible threats?
Yeah, and I think, again, we talk about this. So I used to think the problem is scale of data, and it's still a big problem, of course, but the problem is also the structure of data. So each cloud provider has a different log scheme. Even within that cloud provider, there are multiple different log sources and data sources, and they all have a different scheme. They have different JSONs, they have different interfaces. Just, I talk to people, we're just pulling everything into one place. But if you don't figure out what every field means, then when you need to use it, your SecOps teams are going to struggle. And then trying to do that for hundreds of different log sources, it's hundreds, right, with your SaaS applications, I think is a huge, huge barrier and challenge. And unfortunately, and I'm part of the problem in a way, each of the vendors now in this space is trying to solve it on their own, because there isn't one unified solution. And so as a customer, as an end user, you have to work with that. And hopefully, as an industry, we'll get better at creating this unified language for dealing with this data. But until that happens, you need to deal with what's available right now. No?
So I think to add on top of what you said, the understanding again of what do you actually have, right? So it's what services are running, and these services, what data are they utilizing, and what data are they perhaps taking out, right? So it's understanding the risk, acting upon the right context. That's what I see a lot. So.
Okay, so we're moving on to the last question for the panel before we take questions from the audience. So we'll go by order of sitting. So the final question, what would be your top 3 recommendations for an organization that is currently planning to or already started transitioning to the cloud to help their SecOps be ready and effective in this transition?
Yeah, so since I'm first, I'm actually going to provide top 2 because I don't want to take
okay.
Thank you.
all the strong recommendations. But like I said it before, I'll say it again. Go for consolidation, especially today when customers are searching to also save money. Once you choose a consolidated solution, it will allow you to bring the data in and to get more insights out of it. An example to that could be, for example, a root user in my AWS account that has MFA disabled. This is an important insight to get, but it's only the first part of the investigation flow. The next thing I want to know is who did that, who disabled that MFA for this root account, and then I would also want to know what else did that user do? And once you have a consolidated platform that ingests all the data in, it becomes, I'm not going to say easy, but much easier to try and do that investigation flow, excuse me. So go for consolidation vendors. That would be my strongest advice to you. And as mentioned here before, I think it's important to understand that security is a process. It's not a one-time thing. Don't do it only when your executive asks for reports. Make sure that you have the processes in place, that this will be an ongoing process, and that everyone in your organization understands the importance of it.
Thank you. I feel a bit bad because I have 4. But I combined 2 together. And I think that the first thing, and it's not only about SecOps, but I feel obligated to say it. The first thing you should do is adopt secured architecture when you are in cloud. As we said, there is no tolerance for errors in cloud, and this is why you have to be secure to begin with. So when starting a cloud environment, when building a cloud environment, start with a good secured architecture. That's my first thing. My second thing is a zero trust approach, which I combine with automation. Obviously, it's kind of like the new buzzword, but but it's not really a buzzword. It's something that can help you with challenges, with the massive data, with the scalability, with the change, with the fast pace changes in business. And this is why you have to be as much automated as you can. And everything is about your mindset. Obviously, when you are on cloud, it's not all new for you. On-prem risk and on-cloud risk can be the same or can be similar, but it's a mindset of where you are, who are your partners, who are your stakeholders, etc. And you have to keep that in mind when creating your security plan.
I want to interrupt one thing. I think this is maybe the single most important thing that was said in this panel. The mindset is different. And I see that with companies, even vendors that are moving from traditional software to cloud. You can learn all the technology, but what you really need to change is the mindset. And I don't have really great tips on how to do that, but bring in people from outside that come from a cloud organization to spread that mindset in the org. Yeah. It's super important.
Also spending some of your time and letting your team learn things, yes. Like providing them with time and sources and resources to learn, ongoing learn.
Yeah, of course.
Talking about ongoing studies. Thank you.
So I think we haven't stressed. I mean, we talked about the people, but we haven't stressed. I haven't stressed this enough in talking about enablement. When I talk to our customers, it's a lot of time the frustration with dealing with the organization, and a lot of time dealing with the pace of movement. So I will say that change the approach of trying to enable, to let the security teams become enablers. It has to do a lot with the mindset of business context, right? So once the security organization will really understand business context, they can try to become more enablers, and then we can get talent, right? So speaking as a vendor, we can get more tools, okay, but we need security practitioners to do their job in a better way that is connected to the business. That's one. The other thing, and yes, speaking again from the vendor side, do we enable and put the right guardrails into our environment? And you can guardrails as in architecture or guardrails as in tools that will enable us to move fast as we want in the cloud. So do we have an understanding of what assets we have to begin with? Do we have that understanding of what data we have to begin with? So then once you put in data, you can work within the guardrails and allow movement into the cloud faster, or utilizing the cloud in the way you want to. So that's my take.
Thank you.
So I will mention two things. The first one is the shared responsibility model that we discussed before. It is very important to identify the scope of the responsibility from the security operations perspective, right? Because if you having a SaaS model, most of it will be under your vendor's responsibility. On the other hand, you need to gain visibility, so you need to understand exactly what you are looking for. And the least but not last is the fact that the security serves the business. So it is very important in the transition process to develop a business case for the new technology adoption. So the security operations group will be able to get looking further the management support and the budgets they need to transform to the new technologies. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that, all great tips. I will add, my perspective, because this is what I see day in, day out. Assume breach. And one of the things I hear from a lot of people as they transition to the cloud is, well, we first have to get our configuration in place and our prevention and our detection, and then we'll deal with response, right? But the hackers are not going to wait. The cloud transformation, and that's what happened in 90% of the organizations we see. The cloud transformation is going to happen faster than security can keep up with this. This is unfortunately the reality, because it's not going to stop and wait for security, because the business wants the cloud transformation. And as such, during the transformation, you're likely to be even more exposed than when you're done and completed with it, hopefully sometime in the future. So you are going to be attacked, and you're likely to be breached, and you should prepare yourself for that and make sure that you have SecOps in place, which is what we're all here about, to deal with that when that happens. Good. We have about 6-7 minutes for questions from the audience. So, yes. Hi. Yifat, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I can start, but I think some of the people here knows the answer for me. I use we can say names?
Yes.
Okay.
We're not endorsing, we're just saying what we use. If you're comfortable with that, that's fine.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable with it. So I use Panorize to manage my third parties, and by using Panorize, I'm actually keeping visibility. We said that so many times, that it's all about visibility. Keeping my repository of the vendors up to date, keeping visibility on what's going on their side, managing the vendor in the way I see the vendor. So I have a score, BIA, business impact analysis, that I have for the vendor. And this is how I start, by analyzing the vendor, how I get impacted by it, etc. And that's like my start point. And from there, I using the insights, I'm using intelligence, I'm raising flags to leadership, to business owners, etc.
That I have a question. We can maybe take it offline, because I'm really intrigued. Pat, like what you mentioned is very static, or like understanding before or prior the engagement. What is happening now? Like what's your take on what is happening now in terms of the processing, or what is being accessed?
My solution is not static. I have a scanner that scans the vendor in an ongoing way, so it's not a static. But I can understand your question. It's not in my we call it on-prem. It's not really on-prem, right? We use on-prem for a cloud infrastructure.
Premises.
Yeah. So this is not what we use for visibility in our on-prem solution, but it's that's the way we start, and then we have other monitoring tool for the cloud environment.
I think part of the challenge, and I think I think we all use solutions such as Venerize, other vendors that for third-party assessment. They're crucial to get a baseline understanding. I think part of the challenge is also what do we do about the things that are not part of this process? Maybe they should be, but somebody signed into this new service with their corporate credit card, and suddenly there's user ramp up internally.
I have an answer for
You
it.
have an
Thank
answer
you
for
for
that.
it. Yeah, thank you for raising this point. I keep tracking finance records to get visibility on vendors and third parties that I might not be familiar with. So every vendor that I recognize in this finance repository that might be interesting to me from data perspective, I keep tracking them also.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more question? Yes, back there. I'm going to take this. There are a lot of ways to answer this. Some of them are very cynical, but I will say this. I think when the cloud started, this notion was very apparent, and I think from an IT perspective, to some extent, it does save people. I do think the systems now became way more complicated. So we still don't really save on people, but we don't save on people because we just do so much more with them. And I think that's the point. I think, the story of cloud saving on people hasn't really materialized, right? All IT budgets have gone up. They haven't gone down. But even amount of people haven't. But I think what IT organizations do today with the same amount of people, with the same budget as we use the cloud, is just, exceeds everything we dreamt about 10 years ago. And I think that's the main point to consider. Good. I think, we're out of time. Thank you, everybody.